By the time Derek Holt sat at the defense table in Stark County, Ohio, the men who once called him their second chance would not look at him. The courtroom was quiet in the way a room gets quiet when grief runs out of words. 3 families sat on one side. 2 survivors sat near the back, carrying the kind of silence that does not heal just because a trial ends. On the prosecution table lay photographs of a sober house with its windows boarded and its welcome sign taken down. People in East Canton used to point to that house as proof that broken men could still come home. Now they spoke of it like a place where trust had been locked inside and used against the people who needed it most. Derek had once been praised for taking in men nobody else wanted. Men fresh out of county jail. Men shaking through their first clean week. Men whose families had changed the locks but still prayed someone would answer the phone. He gave them beds, rules, coffee in the mornings, rides to meetings, and the feeling that maybe they were not finished yet. But by the end, prosecutors said Derek had not saved those men. He had learned what they were ashamed of. He had learned who was desperate for a roof, who feared going back to jail, who believed no one would trust the word of an addict over the word of a man called a helper. Then he used that knowledge like a leash. 3 people never came home. 2 survived, but could not return to the lives they had before. Aaron Bell, a young man who once called Derek his brother, was nearly buried beneath a lie he did not create. Even Rusty, the old dog that slept beside Ray Mercer's office door, became part of the town's grief. To the court, Derek Holt looked like a predator who had dressed himself in mercy. But long before anyone called him that, he was a 12-year-old boy standing outside a closed bar in the cold, waiting for his father to stumble through the door while the whole town laughed at the drunk's son. And the question was never whether Derek had been hurt. He had. The question was how a boy who hated weakness so much became a man who survived by feeding on it. The judge did not raise his voice when he spoke Derek Holt's name. He did not need to. By then, every person in the courtroom understood that volume had nothing to do with weight. The quietest words were the ones that stayed longest. The charges had already been read. The witnesses had already tried to explain what it felt like to realize that the man they trusted had known exactly how to use their shame against them. Derek sat between his attorneys with his hands folded so tightly that the knuckles looked pale. He was 39 years old, but under the fluorescent lights, he looked older, as if the trial had drained the color out of him one day at a time. Behind him, nobody called him a founder, a mentor, a second-chance man, or the one person in East Canton who still believed broken people could be rebuilt. The words had changed. Fraud, predator, coward, monster. Derek flinched at the last one, and that flinch bothered Aaron Bell more than any apology could have. Aaron sat 2 rows behind the prosecution table, eyes fixed on the floor. He had once believed Derek when Derek said the house was family. He had once handed Derek his pay envelope because Derek said structure mattered. He had once told his younger sister, Grace, that Mr. Holt was the first man who ever made him feel like his past did not have to follow him into every room. Now Aaron knew the past had followed him because Derek had carried it there. Ray Mercer sat near the aisle, with both hands wrapped around the head of his cane. He did not look angry. That was the worst part. Anger would have given Derek something to fight. Ray looked tired, like a man who had watched a house burn after years of teaching people how to find the exits. Rusty's collar was in his coat pocket, beside old meeting chips and a photograph of Derek from the first year, smiling awkwardly beside a newly painted porch. The prosecutor said Derek had not built a sober house. He had built a kingdom out of other men's need. The sentence was not only about what happened at the end, it was about every smaller choice that made the end possible. The extra beds hidden behind good intentions. The reports that did not match the truth. The residents taught to doubt their own voices. Miguel Santos being called unstable when he was the first man brave enough to say the numbers were wrong. Aaron Bell being left under suspicion because his record made him easier to blame than Derek Holt. And through it all, Derek listened with the face of a man trying not to break in public. That was something he had learned early. Do not break where people can see. Do not beg. Do not cry. Do not give a town the pleasure of knowing it hurt you. Because this was not the first room where Derek had been named by the worst thing attached to him. Long before the courtroom, long before the sober house, there had been East Canton in winter. There had been the dead steel mill at the edge of town, its fences rusted and its windows black. There had been payday bars with neon beer signs buzzing at noon. There had been a narrow rental house where his mother, Elaine, kept the heat low and the bills folded inside a coffee can. And there had been Thomas Holt. Derek's father had once worn steel-toed boots and carried lunch in a metal pail. People said he had been funny before the layoffs, the kind of man who could fix a sink, win a card game, and make a baby laugh in the same afternoon. Derek did not remember that man well. The father he remembered smelled like stale beer and cold smoke. He remembered promises made at the kitchen table with one hand over his heart. He remembered his mother nodding like she wanted to believe, because not believing would have meant admitting the house was already gone. When Derek was 12, he learned that a child could inherit a grown man's shame. At school, boys did not say Thomas Holt's name. They did not have to. They called Derek Drunk's boy, and everyone knew who they meant. The name followed him through hallways, across the cracked basketball court, and past the church basement where free coats were handed out in November. Adults were softer about it, but not kinder. They gave Derek the look people gave dogs left out in the rain. Pity dressed as manners. Derek hated it more than cruelty. East Canton was not the kind of town that hid its failures. It kept them in plain sight. The steel mill sat beyond the railroad tracks like a body no one had buried. Its gates chained. Its parking lot cracked open by weeds. Men who had once walked through those gates before sunrise now sat outside gas stations with coffee gone cold in their hands, talking about jobs that were not coming back. Their wives learned to stretch paychecks, their children learned which houses not to knock on, and everyone learned how to pretend they were only one good week away from being all right. Derek Holt learned earlier than most that a family could fall apart slowly enough for neighbors to watch. His mother, Elaine, woke before dawn. She tied her hair back in the bathroom mirror, buttoned a faded diner uniform, and left while the house was still dark. By afternoon, she smelled like fryer, grease, and dish soap. By night, after a short break she never called rest, she cleaned rooms at the motor lodge off Route 30. She moved through life with the careful quiet of someone trying not to wake a debt collector. Thomas Holt moved differently. When he was sober, he could still look like the man people remembered. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge. He patched a tire. He promised Elaine he had found a lead on work in Canton or Massillon or maybe down near Akron. He would sit at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee and say the same sentence in different ways. "This time I mean it." Elaine always listened. Not because she was foolish, but because hope had become one of the chores she performed for the family. She washed dishes, she packed lunches, she paid what she could. And when Thomas promised to get better, she held the promise for him until he dropped it again. Derek watched all of it. He watched the small resurrections and the smaller collapses. He watched his father shave, put on a clean shirt, and make it 2 days without drinking. He watched his mother's face soften for those 2 days. Then he watched Thomas come home with his eyes wet and unfocused, apologizing before anyone had accused him. By the age of 10, Derek understood the sound of a lie before he understood why adults needed them. At school, he tried to be invisible. He kept his head down, did his work, and never invited anyone over. But poverty has a smell in small towns, and shame has a map. Other kids knew which fathers drank, which mothers borrowed groceries, which families paid rent late. They knew because their parents talked in kitchens, in church parking lots, in the aisles of the discount store when they thought children were not listening. The first time someone called Derek Drunk's boy, he did not answer. It happened behind the gym, after lunch, when the older boys were throwing a crushed soda can against the wall. One of them had seen Thomas outside McGreevy's tavern the night before, leaning against a brick wall with one shoe untied. The boy laughed as he said it, like he had discovered a name Derek had been hiding. Derek walked away. That was what Elaine had taught him to do. Walk away, keep your hands clean, do not give people more to talk about. But the name followed him, Drunk's boy at the lockers. Drunk's boy on the bus. Drunk's boy whispered once by a girl who immediately looked sorry, which somehow made it worse. Derek did not have language for humiliation. He only knew it felt like being blamed for a wound someone else kept reopening. He had not poured the drinks. He had not missed the rent. He had not made his mother cry into the laundry basket after midnight. But when people looked at him, They saw Thomas first. The first real fracture came during a winter assembly at school. Parents had been invited because the 7th grade class was presenting handmade projects about local history. Derek had built a model of the old mill out of cardboard, bottle caps, and gray paint. Elaine bought with coins from the coffee can. He had stayed up late getting the smokestacks right. For once, he wanted a teacher to look at his work and see effort before pity. Elaine came straight from the diner, still wearing her uniform under an old coat. She smiled too brightly when she saw the project, touching the cardboard roof like it was made of something precious. Thomas came late. The side door opened during the principal's speech. Cold air moved through the room, followed by the smell Derek knew before he turned his head. His father stood there in a brown jacket, swaying just enough for everyone to understand. He tried to smile. He lifted one hand as if he were proud. A few parents looked away. A few students did not. The laughter was not loud. That was what made it worse. It came in little leaks, covered by coughs and whispers and the scrape of chairs. Derek stared at his cardboard mill and felt something inside him harden around the shape of that sound. Afterward, one of the boys from behind the gym leaned close and said, "Guess the drunk found his boy." Derek hit him before he finished smiling. It was not a fight so much as an explosion. Teachers pulled Derek back. The other boy cried. Elaine arrived with both hands shaking, her face pale with fear and embarrassment. Thomas kept saying he was sorry, over and over, but every apology sounded to Derek like another person asking him to carry what was not his. In the principal's office, Elaine told him violence would not make people kinder. Derek looked at the floor and said nothing. He knew she was right. That was the first part of the shame. He knew he had not hit the boy because it was necessary. He hit him because, for 1 second, fear had moved from Derek's body into someone else's. For 1 second, nobody was laughing. For 1 second, the room had learned to be careful with his name. That lesson stayed, not as a full belief yet, not as a plan, just as a small, dangerous discovery. If people would not respect your pain, maybe they could be taught to fear touching it. Elaine cried that night in the kitchen while Thomas slept on the couch. Derek heard her from the hallway. He wanted to go to her. He wanted to say he was sorry. But apologies belonged to Thomas, and Derek hated the sound of them. So he stayed in the dark and made himself another promise. He would never become a man people had to forgive every morning. But beneath that promise, another one was forming, colder and less innocent. He would never let weakness make him small again. After the school assembly, Derek stopped trying to prove he was different from his father. He still did his homework. He still took out the trash before Elaine asked. But something quieter changed in him. He no longer believed good behavior could protect him from shame. The town had already decided what family he belonged to. The only thing left, in Derek's mind, was to make sure nobody felt safe laughing about it. At 13, he became useful in ways that made adults praise him and children avoid him. He carried grocery bags for elderly neighbors, shoveled snow before school, and fixed broken things around the rental house. He did these things without smiling. If someone thanked him too warmly, he stiffened. Gratitude felt too close to pity, and pity always felt like a hand reaching down from above. Elaine noticed. She noticed the way her son went still whenever someone offered help. She noticed how he watched Thomas on sober mornings, not with hope, but with suspicion. Thomas would make breakfast, burn the toast, laugh too loudly, and tell Derek he was getting himself straight this time. Elaine would let herself believe it for an hour. Derek never did. He had begun keeping count. 3 days sober. 9 days working odd jobs. 1 week of coming home before dark. Then the familiar slide. 1 missed dinner. 1 unpaid bill. 1 phone call from someone asking Elaine to come get her husband before he got himself arrested. Every relapse confirmed something Derek was too young to understand and too hurt to question. To him, Thomas was not sick. Thomas was choosing weakness and making everyone else pay the bill. Elaine tried to say it was more complicated than that. "Your father wasn't always like this," she told Derek one night while folding motel sheets at the kitchen table for extra cash. Her fingers were red from bleach. A person can get lost and still be a person. Derek looked at the laundry basket, then at the stack of envelopes by the stove. Then why do we have to be lost with him? Elaine had no answer that could survive the room. By 14, Derek was working after school at a tire shop that paid him in cash. The owner liked him because he did not complain. Derek liked the work because rubber, grease, and metal made sense. A tire either held air or it did not. A bolt either turned or it stripped. Machines did not promise to change while hiding a bottle under the sink. Reverend Paul Haskins was the first adult outside the house who tried to reach him without making him feel like a charity case. Paul ran a small youth trade program out of the church basement. He told Derek he could learn electrical work, maybe get certified one day, maybe leave East Canton with more than anger in his hands. Derek almost listened. For 3 Thursdays, he came to the basement after work. He learned how to strip wire, how to read a simple circuit, how to keep his hands steady before touching anything live. Reverend Paul never mentioned Thomas unless Derek did. Then one evening, Derek arrived early and heard 2 women from the church talking behind the supply closet door. They were not cruel. That made it worse. "That poor Holt boy," one of them said. "If someone doesn't get him out, he'll end up just like his daddy." Derek left before Reverend Paul saw him. The next week, Paul came by the tire shop and asked why he had stopped showing up. Derek wiped his hands on a rag and said he was too busy. Paul said busy was not the same as safe. Derek laughed once, hard and flat. "I don't need saving," he said. Paul did not argue. He only looked at Derek for a long moment, like he understood the boy was confusing rescue with humiliation. That look should have softened something. Instead, it made Derek feel exposed. After that, he avoided the church basement. The house got smaller during those years. Not physically, but in the way every room became tied to a bill, a lie, or a disappointment. Elaine coughed through winter and called it allergies. She lost weight and blamed the diner heat. She fell asleep sitting upright with her shoes still on. Derek began leaving cash under the sugar jar because he knew she would refuse it if he handed it to her. Thomas noticed sometimes. He would stand in the kitchen doorway, sober enough to be ashamed, and say Derek should not have to help like that. Derek hated him most in those moments. Not when he was drunk, not when he was loud, but when he understood the damage and still failed to become different. On a wet March night, Elaine collapsed at the motel while cleaning room 18. The manager called Derek before calling Thomas. That detail stayed with him. At the hospital, Elaine looked too small beneath the white blanket. A nurse asked about stress, work hours, and medication. Derek answered what he could. Thomas arrived late, smelling like mouthwash and rain. Elaine survived that night, but something in Derek did not. For a few weeks after the hospital, Thomas tried. He poured bottles down the sink. He drove Elaine to appointments. He made soup from a can and burned it. Elaine smiled at the effort, and Derek watched her forgive him in real time. It felt obscene. He wanted to ask how many apologies a woman could survive before they became another form of injury. But he said nothing, because Elaine's hope was the last warm thing in the house, and even Derek was not cruel enough to take it from her. The final collapse came quietly. Elaine died before sunrise on a Monday in late October, after a Sunday double shift she had insisted she could handle. There was no dramatic goodbye, no speech, no final wisdom, just Derek standing in the hallway while paramedics moved with practiced calm, and Thomas sitting on the porch steps with both hands over his mouth. At the funeral, Derek wore a borrowed black jacket that pinched his shoulders. Reverend Paul spoke about Elaine's kindness and endurance. People cried. Derek did not. He kept his eyes on the casket and told himself that tears were another way of asking the room to take care of you. Then Thomas disappeared before the graveside service ended. Derek found him later behind the fellowship hall, sitting on an overturned crate, drunk enough to weep, but not drunk enough to forget what day it was. Thomas reached for him. "Son, I'm sorry." Derek stepped back. The words landed with no weight at all. Sorry had been spent years ago. Sorry had slept on their couch, eaten their food, emptied their coffee can, and watched Elaine work herself into the ground. In that moment, Derek did not believe his mother had died from one weak heart. He believed she had been consumed by one weak man. Thomas tried calling for months afterward. Derek never answered. Each ignored call felt like proof of strength. Each voicemail deleted before the end felt like another board nailed over a door Derek never planned to open again. He told himself he was choosing survival, but survival, for Derek, was beginning to look like contempt. He had lost his mother, his home, and the last person who could still make mercy seem honorable. What remained was a rule he carried like scripture. Never let a broken man stand close enough to break you too. After Elaine's funeral, Derek Holt did not move out of East Canton. He stopped belonging to it. He rented a room above a pawn shop that smelled of dust and wet cardboard. The window looked down on a sidewalk where men lined up before the liquor store opened. Derek told himself the room was temporary. Everything in those years was temporary. Jobs, addresses, meals, conversations, and sleep. He worked wherever someone needed a back, and did not ask too many questions. Loading docks, tire shops, a warehouse that shipped cheap furniture in boxes that split open if you lifted them wrong. A gas station where he learned to recognize men like his father by the way they counted change. Derek did not drink. That became one of the facts he used to separate himself from Thomas. He could be angry, hard, silent for days. But he did not drink, and in his mind that meant the worst part of the Holt bloodline had stopped with him. The trouble was that hatred can become its own kind of inheritance. When drunk men came into the gas station late at night, Derek watched them with a disgust that felt almost clean to him. If they fumbled with their wallets, he stared until they looked away. If they apologized, he said nothing. He told himself he was judging them because somebody had to. But judgment was easier than grief. It gave him a place to stand above the thing that had once made him feel small. By 21, Derek had built a life around refusal. He refused help. He refused invitations. He refused every message Reverend Paul left about the trade program still being open. He refused blocked numbers because one of them might be Thomas calling from a borrowed cell. Then, on a Friday night in January, refusal ran out of road. Derek had finished a warehouse shift and stopped at a diner near the old mill, not because he was hungry, but because the room he rented felt too quiet. Two men in work jackets sat behind him, talking too loudly about people they used to know. Derek heard his father's name. At first, he stayed still. Then one of the men laughed and said Thomas Holt had always been good at making other people clean up after him. The other said, "His boy turned out mean enough, though. Guess that's what happens when trash raises itself." Derek turned around. The next few minutes became a blur of overturned coffee, scraping chairs, and the waitress shouting for someone to stop. Derek did not remember deciding to move. He remembered only the old heat from the school assembly, rising so fast it felt like it had been waiting years for permission. No one was badly hurt. What mattered was that Derek found himself outside in the freezing parking lot with a split lip, bruised hands, and a police cruiser throwing red light across the diner windows. The officer who took his statement knew his name. "You keep swinging at every man who says something about your daddy," the officer said. "You're going to spend your life proving them right." Derek looked past him toward the mill. For the first time, the sentence landed. Every time he tried to escape Thomas by force, he tied himself closer to him. Every time he made someone afraid to laugh, he became another story people told about the Holt family. That should have been the bottom. Instead, it became the door Ray Mercer walked through. Ray was not a pastor, not a cop, and not the sort of man who confused softness with mercy. He was a court volunteer then, a recovery counselor who sometimes sat with men before hearings and told judges which ones were serious about treatment and which ones were only scared of jail. He was in his late 50s, gray at the beard, with a voice sanded down by hard years and left honest. He came to see Derek 2 days after the diner fight. Derek expected another lecture. Ray gave him gas station coffee and sat across from him in the interview room at the municipal building. "I knew your father," Ray said. Derek's face closed. Ray noticed, but did not apologize for the name. "I knew a lot of men like him. I was one of them for a while." That made Derek look up. Ray did not say it like a confession meant to earn sympathy. He said it like weather, a fact, something that had happened and had consequences. "I'm not him," Derek said. "No," Ray answered. "But hating him is still letting him decide what kind of man you become." Derek almost stood up. The only reason he did not was that Ray's voice held no pity. Ray spoke to him like a man responsible for what he did next. Ray told Derek about a small recovery center outside town, nothing fancy. Folding chairs, bad coffee, leaking roof. Men came there after detox, after jail, after families dropped them off with garbage bags of clothes. The place needed someone who could fix things, drive residents to appointments, keep the building from falling apart, and not scare easily. "I don't work with drunks," Derek said. Ray leaned back. "You already do. You just do it from the wrong side of the counter." Derek hated him for that. Then he hated himself for knowing it was true. Ray did not offer salvation. He offered work. That distinction mattered to Derek. Work could be accepted without kneeling. Work did not require public gratitude. Work let him keep his pride and still step away from the road he was on. So Derek took the job. On his first morning at the recovery center, he arrived before Ray. The building sat behind a closed tax office, its brick walls stained by years of weather. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee, floor cleaner, and nervous men trying to become someone else. Derek looked at them and felt the old contempt rise. He hid it well. He fixed a broken cabinet. He tightened a bathroom faucet. He carried donated mattresses up a narrow staircase. He told himself he was there for the paycheck, not for them. But by the end of that first week, something had shifted. Not softened. Not yet. Shifted. Ray never asked Derek to pity the men. He asked him to be useful. He asked him to show up on time. He asked him to tell the truth about what he saw. He asked him to understand that a man could be responsible for his damage without being reduced to it forever. Derek did not know what to do with that idea. It was the first thing in years that challenged his hatred without humiliating him. And because of that, he stayed. For almost a year, Derek Holt did the kind of work nobody noticed unless it stopped getting done. He arrived before the coffee finished brewing. He took out trash that leaked down the stairs. He drove men to court dates, clinic appointments, job interviews, and church basement meetings with cold folding chairs. He patched drywall, changed bulbs, and learned which residents needed silence in the morning and which ones needed someone to tell them to get out of bed. Ray Mercer watched all of it without praising him too much. Too much praise could make a wounded man suspicious. So he treated Derek like a worker first. Then, slowly, like someone he trusted. The recovery center was not beautiful. The roof leaked. The office heater rattled. Every mug in the kitchen had a different church logo on it. But to men who had spent nights in holding cells, cars, shelters, or houses where family members hid their wallets, the place had rough mercy. There were rules. No using. No threats. No stealing. Meetings were not optional. Rent, when men could pay it, went into a locked box in Ray's office. If someone relapsed, Ray did not scream. He asked what happened, who was in danger, and whether the man was ready to tell the truth before the truth became worse. That last sentence stayed with Derek. Tell the truth before the truth becomes worse. At first, he respected it. It seemed clean, strong. Nothing like the soft forgiveness he had watched Elaine give Thomas until there was almost nothing left of her. Ray did not excuse damage. He named it. Then he asked what the person planned to do next. Derek began to believe there might be a version of help that did not kneel in front of weakness. A version with rules, locked doors at 10, clean sheets folded by the person who used them, coffee made by whoever finished the last pot. For a while, that was enough. The men began to trust him because Derek was steady. He was not warm, not exactly, but he showed up. If he said he would drive someone to court, he was in the van 5 minutes early. If a man needed work boots, Derek found a pair in the donation closet. If a resident panicked before calling his daughter for the first time in months, Derek stood outside the office door and waited without making it sentimental. Some men liked Ray because Ray made them feel forgiven. They liked Derek because Derek made them feel possible. That difference mattered to him more than it should have. The first time someone said, "I don't think I'd still be here without you," Derek did not answer. He carried a toolbox into the storage room and stood there in the dark until the sentence settled inside him. Needed. Not pitied. Not watched. Not laughed at. Needed. Aaron Bell arrived that spring with one duffel bag, shaking hands, and eyes searching for the quickest exit. He was 23, thin from bad months, and careful with every word. His sister Grace dropped him off and spoke to Ray in the parking lot, trying not to cry. Derek saw himself in Aaron before he wanted to admit it. Aaron looked like a man who believed shame had already entered the room ahead of him. So Derek was harder on him than on the others. He made Aaron remake his bed if one corner hung loose. He sent him back to sweep a hallway twice. He corrected the way Aaron logged his work hours. Ray noticed, but waited before stepping in. One evening, Ray found Derek rinsing mugs in the kitchen. "You trying to help that boy stand up?" Ray asked. "Or trying to make sure he knows who owns the floor?" Derek turned off the faucet. "He needs structure. Everybody here needs structure. That's not what I asked." Derek had no answer. Outside the office door, Rusty lifted his head from the rug. The old dog had belonged to Ray for nearly 12 years. A gray-muzzled mutt with cloudy eyes and a habit of sleeping wherever people were most likely to step over him. Men who could not talk to counselors talked to Rusty. Derek pretended not to care. Still, every morning he checked Rusty's water bowl before he checked the coffee. The chance for something larger came in late summer. A duplex behind the recovery center became available after a landlord gave up on it. It needed paint, plumbing, a new back door, and more patience than money. Ray saw temporary housing. Derek saw a place where rules could be built from the ground up. They spent 3 weekends fixing it. Residents helped. Aaron painted baseboards. Miguel Santos, sober almost 4 years and steady in a way Derek respected, repaired the porch steps. Rusty slept in the shade while Derek measured rooms and imagined beds, chore charts, rent envelopes, curfews, order. When the first 4 men moved in, the town called it a sober house. Ray called it a responsibility. Derek called it proof. Proof that he could build what Thomas had ruined. Proof that broken men could stand if someone strong enough held the line. Proof that he was not the boy outside the bar anymore, not the son of a man everyone forgave and forgot to hold accountable. At first, the house worked. The men got jobs. They came home tired. They argued over dishes and television volume. Families visited on Sundays with cautious smiles. Grace Bell brought Aaron a winter coat and hugged Derek on the porch because she did not know how else to thank him. Derek went still in her arms. Gratitude no longer felt exactly like pity. It felt like power with a clean name. That was the first danger. Not the money. Not yet. Not the attention from churches or the nods from local officers. The danger began in the warmth Derek felt when a grown man asked him for permission. Permission to take an extra shift. Permission to see his children. Permission to hold his own paycheck until Monday because he did not trust himself over the weekend. Every request told Derek the same thing. You are the ones standing. They are the ones who need. Ray tried to warn him before the warning had a shape. "A house can save a man," he said one night, watching Derek lock the front door. "But it can also teach him who owns the key." Derek smiled a little. "Keys are the point, Ray. Somebody has to keep the door safe." Ray did not smile back. "No," he said. "Somebody has to remember the door isn't his." Derek heard the words, but by then, the house was full of men saying thank you. The sober house became popular before Derek understood what popularity could do to a damaged man. At first, it came quietly. A mother from a neighboring township called because her son had finished 30 days in treatment and had nowhere safe to go. A probation officer asked if Derek could take one more man for a week, just until a bed opened somewhere else. A church group dropped off canned food and asked to take a picture of the porch. Derek hated the picture at first. Then he saw it printed in the local paper beneath a small headline about second chances in a town that had forgotten how to believe in them. Ray Mercer stood on the left, one hand on Rusty's head. Derek stood near the door, arms crossed, unsmiling. The caption called him the house manager. House manager, not Thomas Holt's son. Not trouble, not a man one fight away from jail. A manager. A builder. A man people called when they did not know what else to do. The first time a probation officer named Warren Keene shook Derek's hand and said, "You're saving us a lot of repeat calls." Derek felt something open in his chest that was dangerously close to pride. Warren was not cruel. He had spent years picking up the same men from the same porches, watching families burn out their last sympathy. To him, Derek's house looked like order. Beds, curfews, men going to work instead of sleeping in holding cells. Warren did not look too closely because he wanted the house to be good. So did the churches. So did the families. So did Derek at first. But need does not stay inside the rooms prepared for it. Need keeps knocking. And Derek, who had once hated being seen as helpless, began to love being seen as necessary. When the 4 beds were full, he added a couch in the back room for a man who had nowhere else to go. When the couch became normal, he put a mattress in the office. He told himself each exception was temporary. He told Ray the numbers were still manageable. He told families there was space because turning them away felt like becoming the kind of person who had once looked away from Elaine. There was money, too. Not enough to make Derek rich. That would have been easier to name as greed. It came in smaller, cleaner forms. Rent envelopes, donations, county referrals, gas money, church checks meant for food or repairs. Every dollar had a reason attached to it. Every shortcut had a desperate face behind it. Derek began to understand how a man could do the wrong thing while using the language of mercy. Ray noticed the house getting crowded. He asked about it one evening while Derek was replacing the lock on the pantry door. "How many men slept here last night?" Derek did not look up. "Enough to keep them off the street." That wasn't the question. "It's January, Ray. It's also a house, not a miracle." Derek tightened the last screw harder than he needed to. "You want me to tell a mother her son can freeze because the paperwork looks cleaner?" Ray was silent for a moment. That was Derek's talent beginning to sharpen. He could take a real concern and wrap it in a moral accusation until the other person felt cruel for asking. "I want you to tell the truth," Ray said. Derek laughed under his breath. "Truth doesn't put a bed under a man." "No," Ray said, "but lies can put a roof over a grave." Derek stood then, angry enough to speak and smart enough not to. He walked out to the porch, where Rusty slept beside the steps. The warning should have stayed with him. Instead, Derek remembered only the part that felt like betrayal. Miguel Santos was the first resident who saw the shape of the problem clearly. Miguel had been sober nearly 4 years, long enough to know the difference between structure and fear. He worked mornings at an auto parts store and spent evenings helping newer men fill out job applications. Derek respected him in a guarded way. Miguel did not beg, flatter, or perform gratitude. He followed rules because he had chosen to, not because he needed Derek to approve his existence. That made him useful. It also made him dangerous. One night, Miguel knocked on Derek's office door holding a folder. He had been helping Nolan Price find a missing rent receipt. In the process, he noticed names on one list that were not on another, payments marked late that had been made, and donated supplies that never reached the shelves. Miguel did not accuse him at first. That almost made it worse. He sat down and said, "Derek, I think things are getting away from you." There it was. Not theft, not fraud, not cruelty. Getting away from you. A phrase that sounded too much like Thomas. A man losing control. A house slipping. People whispering. Someone else noticing before Derek could fix the picture. Derek felt heat rise in his neck. "You been going through my office?" "I was helping Nolan." "You're not staff." "No, I'm someone who lives here." Miguel was giving Derek a chance. That was the truth Derek did not want to look at. He had not gone to Ray. He had not gone to Warren. He had come to Derek first because some part of him still believed Derek would choose the house over his pride. For 1 second, Derek almost did. He saw the fork in the road with painful clarity. He could take the folder, call Ray, admit the house had grown beyond what he could handle, and let someone else help him fix it. Then he imagined the town reading a different headline. House manager loses control. Recovery home under investigation. Derek Holt, son of Thomas Holt, fails men who trusted him. His face went cold. "You know what your problem is?" Derek said. Miguel's expression changed slightly. Derek should have stopped there. He did not. "You get a little time clean, and now you think everybody else forgot who you were." The words landed exactly where Derek aimed them. Miguel looked down at the folder. The room became smaller. Derek kept his voice low. "I gave you a place when your own brother wouldn't let you sleep in his garage. You want to start questioning me in my office?" Miguel stood slowly. "This is why I came to you first." "No," Derek said. "You came because you miss being important." Miguel left the folder on the desk and walked out without raising his voice. By morning, Derek had already changed the story. Not with one grand lie. Just with small remarks dropped where fear could pick them up. Miguel was stressed. Miguel had been acting superior. Miguel was struggling with resentment. The men understood the message beneath the message. If Miguel could be doubted, Any of them could. Aaron heard it and said nothing. Nolan heard it and moved his rent envelope from the kitchen drawer to Derek's hand. Warren Keene heard a version and frowned, but did not push. Ray heard enough to know something in the house had shifted. Derek watched Miguel become quieter over the next week. He felt guilt, but guilt came late and weak, after the useful part was already done. The house remained full. The donations kept coming. Families still thanked him from the porch. And Derek learned the lesson that would ruin everything. A man with a ruined past could tell the truth and still not be believed if the right person knew how to point at the ruin. After Miguel went quiet, the house changed in a way no inspection report could measure. The porch still looked clean. The chore chart still hung beside the kitchen door. Men still left before sunrise with lunch bags and returned at dusk with tired shoulders. Families still pulled up on Sundays and tried to believe the building had given back someone they loved. But inside, the air had learned to hold its breath. The men no longer argued openly about rules. They asked fewer questions about money. If a receipt went missing, they searched their own pockets before asking Derek. If a donation box arrived light, no one said the shelves had been fuller the week before. The house had not become loud or violent. It had become careful. Derek mistook that carefulness for respect. That was the dangerous part. Control rarely announced itself as cruelty in the beginning. Sometimes it looked like order. It looked like beds made tight enough to pass inspection, envelopes stacked in straight lines, grown men lowering their voices when the manager entered the room. Derek told himself the house was finally running the way it should. Ray Mercer knew better. He came by more often after Miguel stopped speaking up. Sometimes he found Derek in the office with the door shut and 3 residents waiting outside like boys outside a principal's office. Sometimes he saw Aaron Bell pause before answering simple questions, his eyes moving first toward Derek, as if permission had to arrive before truth could. Ray did not confront Derek immediately. He watched. He asked small questions. He spoke to residents when Derek was not nearby. What he heard was not enough for a police report, but enough to hurt him. Men were afraid of disappointing Derek, not relapsing, not failing themselves. That distinction mattered. Aaron was the easiest to frighten because he was the most grateful. He had a job at a packaging plant now, a steady schedule, and 3 months without using. Grace visited every other Sunday with groceries and cautious hope. She had begun to believe her brother might come back to the family in pieces, then whole. Aaron believed it too, and that made him vulnerable. Derek knew exactly which words kept Aaron obedient. Not threats. Threats would have made Derek feel like the bad man too clearly. He used responsibility. He used brotherhood. He used the fear of going backward. "You're doing good," Derek told him one evening in the office. "Don't start thinking good means independent." Aaron nodded, ashamed without knowing why. A week later, a problem surfaced with rent envelopes and county referral funds. It was not dramatic on the outside. No sirens, no broken doors. Just numbers that did not line up, and a call from Warren Keene asking why one man listed as housed had missed 2 required check-ins. Derek felt the wall move closer. For months, he had been solving one lie with another small adjustment. A name shifted here, a payment delayed there, a donation used for a repair before the repair money arrived. Each choice had seemed temporary when he made it. Together, they had become a room with no clean exit. He needed time. Aaron gave him a way to buy it. The young man had handled a few rent envelopes while Derek was out driving another resident to court. He had made a mistake on a log once before, nothing serious, just a wrong date corrected in pencil. Derek looked at that correction and understood how easily uncertainty could be shaped. He also understood Aaron had not done anything criminal. That knowledge should have stopped him. Instead, it made the decision heavier, not impossible. When Ray asked about the missing amounts, Derek did not accuse Aaron outright. He did something worse. He let silence point. "Aaron's been helping with envelopes," Derek said. Ray stared at him. "Helping is not the same as responsible." "I'm not saying it is," but he had said enough. By evening, Warren had questions. Grace called Derek twice. Aaron came to the office with his face white and his hands trembling. "Tell them," Aaron said. "Tell them I didn't take anything." Derek looked at the young man in front of him and felt the old split inside himself. One part knew exactly what was happening. One part could still hear Ray's sentence from years earlier, "Tell the truth before the truth becomes worse." The other part saw the headline before it existed. Sober house funds questioned. Manager under review. Residents displaced. Derek Holt, once praised, fails again. He told himself Aaron would survive suspicion better than the house would survive exposure. He told himself no one was going to prison. He told himself he only needed a few days to fix the books, calm Warren, and make the problem disappear. Then he said, "I need you to stay calm and stop making this look worse." Aaron's mouth opened a little. That was the moment something broke between them. Not loudly. Not in a way the whole house could hear. It broke in Aaron's eyes, where trust had been standing and suddenly had nowhere to stand. "You know I didn't," Aaron whispered. Derek looked down at the desk. "I know you need to think very carefully about who is going to believe what," he said. There was guilt in him as soon as the words left his mouth. Real guilt, sharp enough that he almost took them back. But guilt, for Derek, had become a private weather system. It stormed inside him and changed nothing outside. Aaron left the office smaller than when he entered. That night, Derek walked through the house as if checking locks. In the kitchen, Nolan Price stopped talking when Derek appeared. In the hallway, Miguel watched from his room but did not step out. Rusty lifted his head near Ray's office door and gave a low, tired sigh, as if even the dog understood that the house had stopped being a shelter and become something else. Ray returned the next morning. He did not ask for another explanation. He closed the office door and placed Aaron's file on the desk. "Don't do this," Ray said. Derek leaned back. "Do what?" "Use that boy's record to cover your fear." The sentence landed too close to the truth. Derek smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You're getting old, Ray. You want every man here to be a redemption story. Some of them lie." "Yes," Ray said, "and sometimes the man lying has keys." Derek stood. "This is my house." Ray's face changed then. Not with anger, with grief. "No," he said quietly. "That is the first honest thing you've said wrong." For a second, Derek wanted to confess. Not because he was noble, because he was tired. Tired of holding numbers in his head, tired of measuring every conversation, tired of seeing Aaron's face at the edge of every room. But confession would have meant becoming weak in front of Ray. It would have meant handing Miguel his voice back. It would have meant telling Aaron that the man he trusted had chosen him because he was easy to doubt. Derek could not bear that version of himself, so he chose the worse one. He told Ray the house was under control. He told Warren there had been confusion. He told Grace that Aaron needed support, not panic. He told the residents that rumors could destroy everything they had built. By the end of the week, everyone in the house understood the new rule without Derek ever writing it down. Truth was welcome only when it protected him. And Derek, who had once taken the job because work was not salvation, had finally tasted a power darker than gratitude. The power to decide whose shame counted as evidence. Ray Mercer waited until the house was almost quiet. That was his way. He did not shame men in front of other men unless danger demanded it. He believed correction worked best when a person still had enough dignity left to hear it. So he waited through dinner, through the scrape of chairs, through Nolan wiping the counters too carefully because nervous hands needed a task. Aaron kept to the far end of the table. Miguel ate little and watched everything. Rusty lay near the office door, his cloudy eyes half open, breathing with the tired patience of an animal that had seen too many men come apart and come back together. Derek moved through the kitchen like a man in charge of a normal evening. That was the performance. Ray saw the performance. Worse, Derek knew he saw it. When the last resident went upstairs, Ray closed the office door behind them and did not sit down. Derek remained behind the desk. The desk had become important to him lately. It put wood, files, and authority between his body and anyone asking for the truth. Ray looked at the desk, then at Derek. "You need to stand up," Derek laughed once. "We doing this like court now?" "No," Ray said. "Court is what happens when men waste every smaller room where they could have told the truth." Derek's smile disappeared. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The office hummed with an old lamp and the heater kicking weak air through the vent. On the wall was the photograph from the newspaper. Ray, Rusty, Derek, the porch, the headline about second chances. Derek hated that Ray's eyes moved to it. You think this is about money? Ray said. It is about money if Warren keeps asking questions. No, money is where the rot showed through. Derek's jaw tightened. Ray stepped closer to the desk. This is about what you started doing to them. Miguel, Aaron, Nolan. Every man who walks softer when you enter the room, you stopped asking whether they were safe. You started asking whether they were loyal. Derek looked away. Loyal. The word irritated him because it sounded too personal, too close to ownership. He wanted Ray to talk about receipts, limits, schedules, repairs. Those things could be argued. Those things had explanations. Overcrowding was compassion under pressure. Missing records were messy administration. Tension in the house was recovery stress. But loyalty had no clean excuse. You don't understand what it takes to keep this place open, Derek said. Ray nodded slowly. I understand exactly what men tell themselves when they are scared to lose the only thing that makes them feel like somebody. That one found its mark. Derek stood then, but not because Ray had asked. He stood because sitting suddenly felt like being cornered. Don't talk to me like I'm one of them. Ray's face changed with pain, not surprise. One of who? Derek heard the trap after he stepped into it. He could have softened it. He could have said residents, clients, men in recovery. Instead, the silence answered for him. For one naked second, the whole truth stood in the room. Derek had built his life around helping men he still feared becoming. Ray lowered his voice. You are not better than them because you stayed sober. You are responsible for them because you took the keys. Derek looked at the keys on the hook beside the filing cabinet. Front door, pantry, office, medication lockbox, van, basement storage. Each one had once felt like duty. Now they looked like evidence. Ray placed Aaron's corrected work log on the desk. I know he didn't do what you're letting people think he did. Derek swallowed. Ray, no. Listen to me. You still have a night. The words stopped him. Ray's eyes were wet now, but his voice stayed firm. Call Warren. Call the board. Call the families. We close the house temporarily, move the men where we can, and tell the truth before the truth decides how ugly it wants to become. Derek almost hated him for making it sound possible, because for a few seconds it was. He saw it. Not clearly, but enough. Aaron cleared. Miguel believed. Ray hurt but still standing beside him. The house damaged, maybe closed, maybe mocked by the same town that had praised it. Derek disgraced, investigated, remembered not as a savior but as another Holt man who let a home collapse. There it was, the old wound under the new crime. Not jail, not money, not even Ray's disappointment. The unbearable thing was the headline inside Derek's own mind. He had become the weak man who made others clean up the damage. His mother's tired hands came back to him then. Elaine counting bills. Elaine choosing hope like a chore. Elaine forgiving Thomas until forgiveness looked like surrender. Derek told himself he was different because he did not drink, because he worked, because men depended on him, because houses needed someone strong enough to make hard choices. But in that office, under Ray's grief, he understood something he did not want to survive understanding. He had not escaped Thomas by becoming sober. He had escaped him by becoming useful. And now usefulness was being taken from him. What happens to them if I go down? Derek asked. Ray closed his eyes for a second. There it is. What? You're holding them hostage inside your reputation and calling it care. Derek's face hardened. That was easier than breaking. Ray reached into his coat pocket and took out Rusty's old blue leash. He had used it earlier that day, but now he folded it once in his hands, nervous for the first time Derek could remember. When I first got clean, Ray said, I wanted people to need me too. Need feels safer than love. Love can leave. Need stays until it has another place to sleep. Derek did not answer. I learned the hard way that needing a broken man to need you is not service. It is hunger. The sentence should have saved him. It did not. Derek looked past Ray to the house beyond the office door. He heard floorboards creak upstairs. He heard a faucet turn off. He heard men breathing inside the structure he had built, men with nowhere easy to go, men who might curse him tomorrow but still needed a bed tonight. That was the lie he chose. He picked the part that sounded merciful and used it to cover the part that was afraid. I can fix it, Derek said. Ray's shoulders dropped. No, Derek. You can confess it, that is not the same thing. But Derek had already moved away from the doorway Ray was holding open. He began speaking in the calm voice he used with panicked residents. He would review the files. He would talk to Warren. He would make sure Aaron was treated fairly. He would reduce the number of beds over time. He would not let the house be destroyed by confusion. Confusion. Ray stared at him as if that word had answered every question left between them. Before leaving, Ray paused beside Rusty in the hallway. The old dog lifted his head. Ray rubbed the gray fur once, then looked back at Derek. "You have until morning," he said. "After that, I won't protect your version of this." When the door closed, Derek stood alone in the office. For the first time in months, no one was asking him for permission. No one was thanking him. No one was calling him strong. He sat at the desk and put his hands over his face. A sound came out of him, small and broken, but he swallowed it before it became anything the house could hear. He knew Ray was right. He knew Aaron was innocent. He knew the sober house had become a place where truth waited outside until Derek allowed it in. And still, when morning came, he chose the house, not the men inside it. The house. The name. The lock. The version of himself he could not bear to lose. Morning did not bring confession. It brought coffee, footsteps, and Derek Holt standing in the kitchen with a clipboard as if paper could hold the house together. Men came downstairs carefully. Nolan avoided Miguel's eyes. Aaron kept one hand around his mug and did not drink. The house was awake, but nothing in it felt alive enough to speak first. Ray arrived at 8. He did not knock. That small change turned every head. Ray had always knocked, because he believed a door mattered to a man trying to recover his life. This time, he opened it with his own key and stepped inside with Warren Keene behind him. Warren looked uncomfortable, like a man who had trusted convenience for too long and now felt it turning into evidence. Derek put the clipboard down. "Ray, this isn't the way." "No," Ray said. "The way was last night." The sentence traveled through the room. Ray did not shout. A shouting man could be dismissed as emotional, old, jealous. But Ray's voice was steady, and steadiness had always been his power. He looked at Aaron first. "You did not steal from this house," Ray said. Aaron's face changed so quickly it almost hurt to watch. Relief came first, then fear, because relief inside Derek's house had learned to ask permission too. Derek felt the room shift away from him. "You don't have authority to say that," Derek said. Ray turned. "Authority is not the same thing as truth." Warren lowered his eyes. Miguel stood near the hallway. For weeks, Derek had trained the house to treat Miguel's silence as proof that he had been unstable. Now Miguel's silence felt like testimony. Ray placed a folder on the kitchen table. "The numbers are wrong. The beds are over capacity. Aaron was used. Miguel was discredited because he saw it before I did. And every man in this house knows more than he feels safe saying." Nolan whispered, "Ray." Derek cut him a look. Nolan stopped. That tiny obedience told the room more than any document. Ray saw it too. His grief hardened into something clearer. "There," he said. That is what I came to name." Derek stepped closer. "You came here to destroy the only place these men have." "No," Ray said. "I came because you already did." The words struck Derek in a place no officer, no resident, no accusation had reached. Ray, speaking as if the house was already ruined, felt like watching someone bury him while he was still standing. "You think you're different from your father because you stayed dry," Ray said. "But you found another way to make other people clean up after you." The kitchen went still. Derek's face emptied. For years, Thomas Holt had been the locked room inside him. Derek had built work, rules, keys, schedules, and reputation around that room so no one would open it. Ray had just opened it in front of everyone. "Don't," Derek said. Ray's voice broke for the first time. "Then stop proving it." That was the final mercy. And Derek could have taken it. He could have sat down. He could have told Aaron the truth. He could have given Miguel back his voice. He could have looked at Warren and said the house needed to be emptied, audited, repaired, and maybe never opened under his name again. People would still have been hurt. Charges might still have come. The town would still have whispered. But the worst thing had not yet finished becoming itself. Derek saw that path. Then he saw what waited on it. Not prison first, not headlines first, but smallness, the old smallness. The son of the man everyone pitied, people realizing he had not been strong, only frightened with keys. Something in him chose the keys. "You all hear this?" Derek said, turning to the men. "This is what happens when people who don't live here decide they know what you need." Ray closed his eyes. Derek went on. He said Ray was confused. He said Warren had incomplete information. He said Miguel had been bitter since being corrected. He said Aaron was scared and needed support, not public pressure. Every sentence carried just enough concern to hide the blade inside it. He did not threaten anyone. He did not have to. The house had already learned the cost of being the first man to speak. Aaron looked at Derek as if seeing him clearly was worse than being deceived. Miguel's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet because he understood now that truth in that room was not enough by itself. Nolan sat down slowly, ashamed of his own fear. Warren finally spoke. "Derek, I need everyone to stay available for interviews." "Of course," Derek said. "We'll cooperate." "Way." The word landed like a chain. Ray looked toward the office door. Rusty was there, old body lowered onto the rug, watching the room with tired eyes. For a moment, Derek remembered the first weeks. Bad coffee, clean sheets, Ray's hand on the dog's head. The house had once been good. Not perfect. Not pure. But good enough to save someone. Then Aaron whispered, "Why won't you tell them?" Derek looked at him. There was no anger in Aaron's voice. That was what made it unbearable. It was the voice of a man asking why the person holding the door had decided to lock it from the inside. Derek wanted to say something that would make Aaron stop looking at him like that. Instead, he said, "Because you don't understand what I'm trying to protect." And there it was. Not a denial. A confession wearing the wrong clothes. Ray picked up Rusty's leash from the hook by the door. "You are not protecting them," he said. "You are protecting the man you pretend to be." Derek did not answer. By noon, Warren had left to begin the process Derek could no longer fully control. Ray had taken Rusty with him. Miguel had packed a small bag. Aaron sat on the porch steps waiting for Grace, staring at the street as if every car might bring back the life he had almost believed in. Derek stood in the office alone. The house was quieter than ever. For the first time, he understood that control could feel exactly like abandonment once people stopped mistaking it for care. But understanding came without surrender. He opened the file drawer. He took out the folders, and he chose, one more time, to make the truth fight its way through him. By the time the trial ended, the sober house no longer had a sign. Someone had taken it down after the investigation began. For weeks, the porch stood bare, the paint chipped around the rectangle where the word welcome had once hung. People drove past more slowly than they needed to. Some looked with anger, some with shame. Most looked away before they reached the corner. No one in East Canton wanted to admit how badly they had needed Derek Holt to be good. That need had protected him longer than any lie could have on its own. Churches had wanted a success story. Families had wanted somewhere to send the sons they were too tired to rescue alone. Officers had wanted fewer repeat calls. The town had wanted proof that one clean house could make up for years of boarded mills, empty promises, and men disappearing into addiction. Derek had understood that hunger. Then he had fed it with other people's silence. In court, the final consequences were spoken carefully. 3 people had died after the house became a place where warnings were ignored. Records were bent, and fear kept men from telling the truth early enough. 2 survived, but survival did not return them to the lives they had before. Aaron Bell was cleared of the suspicion Derek had allowed to gather around him, but clearing a name did not erase the days when everyone in the house had watched him shrink under a lie. Miguel Santos testified with his hands folded on the stand. He did not raise his voice. He explained that he had gone to Derek first because he believed the house could still be corrected. He explained what happened after Derek decided Miguel's past was more useful than Miguel's warning. When the defense asked if Miguel had ever lied during his years of addiction, Miguel said yes. Then he looked at Derek and said, "That is why I know what it sounds like when a man starts lying to survive himself." Ray Mercer testified last. He was older by then, or maybe grief had simply made the years visible. Rusty was gone. Ray did not describe the dog as more important than any person. He only said Rusty had been part of the first honest peace many men in that house had known. The loss of him became one more small proof that Derek had not only damaged people, he had damaged a place that had once taught damaged people how to breathe. The defense spoke of Thomas Holt, of Elaine, of a boy humiliated by a father's addiction, a mother's exhaustion, a town that confused pity with kindness. They said Derek had been shaped by abandonment, shame, and fear. None of that was false. That was what made the courtroom so quiet. The truth of Derek's pain did not cancel the truth of what he had done. When Derek was allowed to speak, he stood slowly. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, afraid he would turn even remorse into another way of taking space. But his voice was low. He said he was sorry to Aaron. Aaron did not look up. He said he had failed the men in the house. Miguel watched him, without expression. He said Ray had tried to save him from himself. Ray closed his eyes. Derek stopped there, because perhaps he finally understood that every extra word risked becoming another door he wanted someone else to open for him. Apology had come too late to be useful. Regret had arrived after the damage had already learned to live inside other people. The judge did not call Derek a monster. That almost hurt him more. Instead, the judge called him responsible. Responsible for the overcrowded house he refused to close. Responsible for the records that hid danger instead of revealing it. Responsible for using men's histories as weapons against their present truth. Responsible for allowing Aaron Bell to stand under a shadow Derek knew did not belong to him. Responsible for ignoring Ray Mercer when there was still time to choose a smaller ruin. The sentence was long enough that Derek would almost certainly die in prison. Multiple consecutive terms. No easy road back into the world. No final transformation that could undo the names read in court. The judge said punishment could not restore the dead, repair the survivors, or give Aaron back the version of trust he had lost. But the law could at least refuse to let Derek's wounds become an excuse for the wounds he inflicted. Grace Bell gave the final victim impact statement. She did not yell. She did not ask for Derek to suffer in dramatic language. She only described the brother who had called her after his first month at the sober house, proud because his hands had stopped shaking long enough to hold a job application. She described how he had believed Derek when Derek said the house was family. Then she looked at Derek. "You did not destroy my brother by hating him," she said. "You destroyed him by making him think he was finally safe." That sentence stayed longer than the sentence from the judge. Years later, people in East Canton would still argue about when Derek Holt became unreachable. Some said it began with Thomas. Some said it began when Elaine died. Some said Ray trusted him too much, or Warren looked too little, or the town wanted a hero badly enough to mistake control for care. Maybe all of that was part of the story, but none of it was the whole story. Because Derek had been offered doors. Reverend Paul had offered one. Ray had offered one. Miguel had offered one. Aaron, in his wounded trust, had offered one. Even on the last night, Ray stood in front of Derek and pointed toward the truth before the truth turned fatal. Derek saw the door. Then, he chose the lock. Understanding where the darkness began does not mean forgiving what it became. Derek Holt was once a boy ashamed of a broken man. But in the end, he became a man who broke others and called it shelter.